I had a pretty hard time designing this project. In fact, I never had planned to design a mill at all. At a glance, the space seems to be filled with a wide variety of amazing projects, so I didn't feel that I needed to contribute myself. During development of the lathe, I started looking into cheap mills that could make simple aluminum components. But after poring over many existing designs, I realized that the mill I wanted didn't yet exist. Specifically, a mill that has a focus on rigidity, a small footprint, and a cost of less than 500 Australian dollars. That is a very plain explanation of quite a lot of consideration. But the point is that I decided making my own mill was going to be worth my time. The design I came up with can be broken down into a basic steel skeleton that is designed to be as easy to make as possible. This is then wrapped in a thin 3D printed shell, which is then filled with concrete. This makes for a robust, vibration-resistant frame that is also cheap and easy to make. To this frame, various other components, like the linear rails, are then attached. It has a smaller area than gantry-style machines at 20 by 10 by 6 centimeters, but is far more robust than gantry machines in its price bracket. The build begins, as always, with some printed parts. After removing supports, 32 M3 nuts are installed into the lower half of the shell. These are then connected via a cover plate that serves to align the pieces and seal in the future concrete. Seals for the top cover are added, along with a front connecting plate and the first 3 coupling nuts. After further connecting the two halves, the main lower spine bar can undergo the tedious task of inserting it through the length of the base. That was smart. Moving to the back, we can install the rear wings of the base with a cover plate. These are also followed up with even more threaded rod skeleton. Before continuing, we need to prepare a bunch of thread inserts for the concrete. These hexagonal pieces are one way I've found to cheaply add reusable threads to large concrete bodies. They provide a decently strong thread that's easy to install and doesn't require any annoying support or heated inserts. Using 2 of these in M3, we connect the rear wings on both sides. A bunch more of these are also installed in several places far too annoying to film. Now, after a bit of glue, the base is done and we can start moving up the column. Kinda feels bad to cover this all up. Only a few heated inserts are needed this time. The comments informed me last time that the eBay listing lied to me, and I've been using injection molding inserts this whole time. But they work fine for this purpose. After installing the front alignment bars and making sure everything is in position, the front covers also receive a round of glue. I didn't get a shot at this point, but the base is now essentially done and we can move on to the column. This begins with 6 more thread inserts as well as 3 more coupling nuts. Two more lengths of threaded rod are added to the base, followed by the column itself. Before we can pour the concrete, the rear column also needs to be made. It is a simple 40mm tube with 4 holes drilled into it using a guide. The tube is slid onto the rear of the column, aligning with the bottom threaded rod. An alignment piece is held in place with the rod for the arms, and then a final 3 lengths of threaded rod are used to tighten the top of the column into the steel tube. After a final round of glue, the base is almost ready for concrete, but I choose to add the lower linear rails first. At this point, I've never used linear rails before, and I'm scared of losing ball bearings, hence why the blocks are left on. This is totally unnecessary, and I later learned that taking the blocks off isn't actually that hard. I cover the whole base in plastic from my favourite supermarket chain, then the base is actually ready to be poured. But one more thing first. The X-axis carriage is also designed to be mostly concrete and steel, so we need to ready that as well first. A few nuts are installed into the sides, as well as 4 more lengths of threaded rod. After the gentle and precise installation of some M3 nuts for the linear rail, the cover and rail, again pointlessly with bearing blocks, can be installed and plasticed up, ready for the pour. I'm using my usual high strength concrete with the big aggregate sifted out. That's probably as silly as it sounds, but I've gotten consistently good results from it, and I don't have time to mess up these big forms. The pour went pretty smoothly. The first mix for the column was a little too thick, but I recovered it and, using a palm sander, managed to get a good even fill. The X-axis was surprisingly messy, but still turned out fine. After an hour, I do some cleanup, then these are left to set for a few days. Now back to the slides. To begin with, we're going to make 3 of these compact anti-backlash setups. These are small enough to fit under the linear rails, and are all mostly identical except for the Y-axis being a bit more slim. After installing the T8 lead screw, the X-axis gets its block mounted, after which it can be mounted to the main base. Next, the Z-axis can also get its block mounted. The order of operations is a bit different here, with the rails being mounted to the axis first, rather than the block below. After installing some T-nuts, the lead screw can be installed, then the whole setup mounted to a plate of 2100 extrusion. This setup can finally be mounted to the X-axis. Oh, it's getting closer. It's getting closer. And this feels solid, which is nice. I'm glad that it doesn't feel totally horrible. Now we prepare the side arms and X-axis motor. The E-stop is installed into the left arm, along with the X-axis NEMA 17. Here I'm using a flexible coupler, which of course was never going to work, so I changed it out to a rigid one later. This setup can then be slid on, along with the cover for the electronics. The Z-axis is a similar process. The motor is installed with the coupler, then pushed onto the threaded rod lengths, which are used to secure the whole setup in place. The Y-axis is a similar build process. First, the two linear rails are mounted to the back plate, which is then attached to the column with 3 M8 bolts. The motor plate is prepared with 4 M6 nuts and a lead screw setup, before also being mounted onto the column. This is sandwiched between two plates which are secured with lengths of threaded rod running through the column. At this point the mill is mostly done. All that's left is the spindle and counterweight systems. To begin the spindle, the right and left arm pivots both need a cable router bolted in place. Through one of these, the wire for the spindle is run, and the other gets the fan and other electronics. Into the spindle cover, 2 M8 bolts are press fit and secured in place. The fan is mounted in the front and has its wires routed out the side of the cover. Onto this, 2 spacers are installed, followed by the arm pivots. Now is also a good time to install the cable cover and retaining nut. The spindle can now be bolted in place, followed by the cover assembly. There's a couple more parts to make before it's all together. First, using a printed guide, the holes need to be drilled at each end of some 10mm aluminum tube. These tubes are then tapped to M4 and installed into the rear of the counterweight mounts. The middle pivots need 2 linear bearings installed into each of them, before they can be bolted to the column with a spacer. Through these, the counterweight arms can be installed into the spindle cover. Finally, we make the counterweight itself. Around 1 kilo is all it needs. If you're somewhere where lead shot is easy to get, that's a safe bet, but I actually went with loose change and sand since I had a lot lying around and it got the job done quite well. The counterweight is sandwiched between the 2 arms, and after some wire management and mounting the cheap compressed air hose, the mill is essentially ready to use. The counterweight system I use is a bit different from the more conventional cable-driven systems. It's needed here because of the small NEMA 17 motors I use to keep the cost reasonable. I went with arms over a cable system, mostly for aesthetic reasons. The mill's design felt unbalanced without them. They are also a callback to a feature of the last mill I made when I was starting out printing a few years back. Full reaction to that mill at the end of the video. The mill does have accommodation for all wiring to be kept neat and attractive, and I have designed an electronics enclosure that I'm yet to build, hence the mess you see here. The first part I wanted to tackle was replacing this plate here, as it's currently the weakest link in the machine, and prone to heat issues. However, the stock hasn't arrived yet, so I'm going to make a much smaller part instead. I first set up some stock to do some cutting tests. I've set up a spoil board here, and then go around using the superglue and tape method to hold some stock in place. This creates a surprisingly strong fixture while still being easy to remove. These are my first real cuts in metal ever, so I'm being pretty conservative. My goal here is just to get an idea of any settings that could work. I've never really used a mill before in my life. You'd think that would be a prerequisite to designing one, but oh well. After 2 of these pockets and 1 ruined work surface, I decided to just have a go at a real part instead. This is the part I'm going to make. It's a mount for the limit switch, of which the machine currently has 3. The part actually begins with a tool change. First, these 2 holes are drilled to 1.6mm for an M2 tap. Then, a 3.175mm end mill is used to cut the slot and contour operations. It's not much, I really wanted to show more here, but the wall finish is pretty nice and the part does its job. There's a lot of variables I could play with to try and get faster cuts or cleaner results, speeds, feeds, and end mills that cost more than $1, just to name a few. But at this point the project has dragged on and I just want to move forward with a result so I can get back to making videos. I was also playing with fire, covering my temporary electronics and chips, so I don't want to mill more until that's sorted, which will be covered in a future part. Overall, I'm happy with the mill, but there's room for improvement. The column is rock solid, as is the table. Really, all my issues come from the spindle. Even if I remove the fan entirely, it vibrates quite poorly and overheats quickly. I'm sure the insulation from the arms isn't helping with this, but I found during testing that the spindle overheats even when it's not attached to the machine. I knew I was taking a risk with this spindle as I haven't seen many good reviews online, so I want to investigate fixing, modifying, or replacing it as a top priority. Aside from that, I don't like the design of these side wings, and there's several parts I'd like to replace with milled aluminum versions. The total cost of the machine is around 500 Australian / 300 US. I think it's quite unique at that price point, and with some tweaking could become an attractive option. The concrete really does a lot, and if nothing else, I hope to see it picked up in more designs. I won't release the files just yet. I don't want the stress of answering questions until I've sorted out some other issues in the design first. Thank you to my patrons, and to you, as always, for watching. The rest of this video is my reaction to my last mill video from 4 years ago. It's kinda cringe, but it's interesting to see what a few years of improvement can look like. Thanks again for watching. Okay, this is honestly the first time I viewed this video in I think about... has it been 4 years? I'm gonna hope that it's not been 4 years, but I think it's been about 4 years. You know, I was still learning at the time. I want to view this as a learning experience. I think it'll be interesting to see what I did right more than what I did wrong, because I think most of it is what I did wrong. But also maybe it'll serve as, I don't know, dare I say, inspiration of, you know, what 4 years of progress can look like, comparing, you know, what I made just, you know, a few years ago compared to what I'm able to make now. So, gonna need a little something to help get through this, because I do not like the sound of my own voice, but okay, well, let's get into it then. Classy. I seem to be making a slot. So this is something that's persisted into today's, or my videos that I make today. I want to show something being made with all the tools I design, because I think that's something that really frustrates me with videos on YouTube, like tool videos, is when they make something fantastic or seemingly fantastic and then don't show it in use. And I always kind of assume if you don't show it in use, it's probably because it doesn't work. Like, I'll check the channel, I'll look for it, I want to see it working, but if you never show it, that always leaves a bad taste to me. So I've always tried to show whatever I've made making something, although in this case to say that I made something useful is perhaps a stretch. Also, can I just say, what a tiny runtime. I used to make... sometimes I think back to how, I used to make weekly videos. How did I do weekly videos? And then I actually look and go, I made weekly videos because they were only 2 minutes long. But anyways. Hey guys, welcome to what is technically a part 4 to my drill press series, except that my drill is now a mill. And I do mean that literally. The milling setup you see here is an upgrade to my drill press, and some of the parts of the mill were actually made on the drill press before I upgraded. This is funny, this is worth noting. The way that, okay, for one, I used to use just threaded rod for my lead screws, but for two, for some reason, my way of securing the threaded rod was I would drill 2mm holes through it, put a printed collar on, and then like press fit a brass pin. Just so much more complicated. Both the mill and the drill are driven by a sewing machine motor. Stopping again. I had this one sewing machine motor that I took off my sewing machine. I'm pulling the drill press towards myself to tension the belt. It's still interesting to see all these just crazy ideas that I would never even consider doing today. Like, yeah, a leather belt and a wall-mounted motor, just totally impractical. I guess to begin, I'll talk about the goals for this project and what I've achieved so far. The main purpose of this mill is to be cheap. Okay, that hasn't changed. My current mill's primary design goal is also to be cheap. I've just recognized that you need at least a little bit of quality for something to be worth making. Going for as cheap as possible is, at best a novelty, more than likely a waste of time. Incredibly well. You can put one of these together for around 50 Australian dollars, which is by far the cheapest access to a mill I've seen. I would... yeah, I suppose. Look, I think thinking back, it's funny how highly I thought of myself while making this. I was really proud of this at the time. I thought I was just the coolest. And looking back on it, it's like, wow, no, I wasn't the coolest. This sucks. It's important to recognize that you learn and grow better, but I really do cringe thinking at my arrogance of what I thought this was going to do. Because it's really quite terrible, as we'll see. Which is by far the cheapest access to a mill I've seen, excluding lucky second-hand finds and whatnot. Okay, this I still agree with. Where on the lathe video, for example, I get comments saying, I bought a used South Bend for $50 on Marketplace. Clearly that's the better option. It's like, yeah, obviously that's the better lathe, but not everyone's finding $50 South Bends on Marketplace. That's just an absurd argument to even make. Where I live, there'll be like a couple of lathes listed at all per week. And the actual like good deals is in like single digits per year. So that's not really a reliable strategy. Yeah, those comments always annoyed me. Is that 300? It is. That's 300 subscribers. Wow. My other goal was to be able to mill soft metals, and that I unfortunately have not achieved. It has the power, but no accuracy. The head starts shaking when I try to cut any sort of metal. Now, admittedly, the fact that I'm using the cheapest end mills on eBay may have something to do with this. It's not that I'm using the cheapest end mills, it's that I'm using... Well, it's partly that, but it's also that I'm using 4 flute end mills. I'm using the wrong type of end mills, as well as them being the cheapest. Also the wrong RPM, a whole bunch of... Everything's wrong. Everything's wrong. But right now, I'm not going to claim that this thing can be used for metal, unfortunately. Plastics, woods, and other soft materials, however, it manages just fine, if you're slow and gentle with it. I guess I'll talk about what it needs next now. Most importantly, measurement of some kind. Right now, it's just guesswork, which is not good. How I'll add measurement, I do not know, but I'll work something out. I would not, in fact, work something out. I never revisited this after this. I mean, I guess now I've revisited it years later. In a sense, I've made another entire mill, but God, I need a top up. There we go. It also needs a better vice/clamping setup. The current one is very basic. I also want to replace the brass rods with steel at some point, in hopes of making it a bit more rigid. Yeah, mate. Your 4mm brass rods. That's the problem. Is that they're not steel. They should be 4mm steel rods. And I remember I looked for 4mm steel rods. As if that's gonna do anything. I'm gonna be taking a break from this project for 4 years. For a while, since it's taken up 8 weeks, and I'm gonna work on some smaller stuff for a bit. But rest assured, I will come back to those upgrades that I mentioned. I would not. Rest assured, nobody cares, mate. Nobody made this for the best. Oh, that's so funny. Thanks for watching. Parts so far are linked in the description, along with music and socials and all that other stuff. If you enjoy this content and want to see more, maybe consider subscribing. It's a great indication to me that it still stands true. If you like what you see, just like and subscribe. I mean, at least I got something, right? Now I want to go back a step and comment on a couple of notes about the build. For one, I don't show. There's a separate build video. I used to do like an info video and then a build video as two separate things. There is no insight in this video into any of the build and like how did I make this, right? There's no insight. You just get there's one glory shot. There's two. There's like a second wide shot. There's I think that's a third. There's not much information about what's going on here, which I think really devalues these videos. I don't try to go too much into the design because there's only so many details that people want to know, but people do want to know the general details. Like most of the people watching are interested in what have you used for your linear motion, what are your lead screws, what is the headstock construction. What are these arms? And none of that's here. On that note, I think most of the decisions on this mill are just completely wrong. The linear motion is 4mm brass rods, just running straight through the plastic. There's no bushing, there's no bearing. They just go straight into the plastic. Just terrible. Likewise, the ways, there's a dovetail in the middle there. Plastic on plastic, just totally useless. The lead screws, aside from having these weird little collars, are just threaded rod. Threaded rod with a single nut in the middle of that carriage. Really just... I guess they're cheap. I guess that was the justification. I also didn't know any better. I didn't know what a linear rail was this time. There's a single design feature that I started in this build, or I guess the drill press, and have continued to use ever since. And that's the threaded rod running the length of the column. And I have continued to use that in my projects ever since. So that's one thing that that's one thing that's a tick here. The second one is these arms. Now these were my attempt to make the headstock stop shaking as much. They didn't work, but I did think they looked really cool. And that's something that I carried over to the latest mill. Apart from that, I don't think this has many redeeming features. Yeah, I hope that was at least somewhat interesting. I thought it would be, kind of cool to, after that, you know, after seeing my latest mill, going back just a few years and seeing how much has changed, and whether that's inspiring, whether that's cringy, I don't know, but I thought it was worth including. So, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.